The polar night lasts for months. The sun never rises. Above the ice, a glow unfolds, cold and silent, like light from another world. Wind drives snow across an emptiness where nothing human should exist. There are no landmarks, only ice, water, and sky merging into one. For ancient people, this was not a cold country. It was the end of the world, the border where the known stopped. And yet, this is exactly where they placed a land none of them had ever seen. The Greeks called it Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind. There, they said, no one knows sickness, old age, or war. The sun never fades, the soil yields twice a year, and people live in a calm, close to the divine. Poets described it precisely. White swans over still water, endless festivals, singing that never stops. Apollo himself was bound to this land, and sacred gifts came from there to his sanctuaries. The greatest names of Greek antiquity wrote about Hyperborea. Herodotus cautiously, with open doubt. Pliny the Elder and Diodorus Siculus in far more detail, as if describing a real place past the edge of the known. Herodotus even gave directions. Beyond the Scythians, beyond the one-eyed men and the griffins that guard the gold, where the earth itself ends. It would be easy to call this a beautiful fairy tale, but the tale is not the strange part. What is strange is that this image, a lost world at the edge of the world, returns in far more than Greek sources. It surfaces among peoples separated by thousands of kilometers, as if several cultures held fragments of one very old story. And then the maps appear. In 1595, Gerardus Mercator published his map of the Arctic. His name still belongs to a projection used today. At the center of the pole, he drew a great black rock ringed by a whirlpool, and a landmass split by 4 rivers into 4 islands. A land that is not there. And Mercator was not the first. A magnetic mountain in the north had appeared on European maps before him, as though cartographers were passing on something heard, not seen. Where did the image come from? Mercator did not invent it. He relied on an older text that has not survived, written centuries before him. He simply put on paper what people believed long before he was born. And here, the central question of this film arises. What if the story of a northern land is not an invention? What if memory stands behind it, passed on so long ago that we stopped telling it apart from fiction? We will not hunt for treasure or prove anyone's theory. We will follow that memory through ancient texts, old maps, and forgotten expeditions, and try to understand why a story about a land that does not exist has proved so persistent. Perhaps Hyperborea was never simply a legend. Let us begin with the simplest thing, the name itself. Hyperborea is built from 2 Greek elements, hyper meaning beyond, and boreas. For the Greeks, Boreas was the god of the north wind, the cold breath that brought winter. He lived, they said, in Thrace, north of the Greek world. The Greeks organized the world by its winds. Every direction had its wind god, and the north belonged to Boreas. So, Hyperborea means the land beyond Boreas, past the boundary the north wind blows from. There is a logic hidden in the name. If cold comes from the north, then somewhere past the source of the cold, past the wind, there had to be a place the wind no longer reached. Warm, quiet, out of reach. That is how the Greeks pictured it. The earliest mentions are very old. They appear in the fragments of Hesiod, a poet of the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era. Later, Pindar describes Hyperborea, one of the greatest lyric poets of Greece. In his verses, it is a country you cannot reach by ship or on foot, a land without sickness, aging, or war, where endless festivals honor Apollo. Pindar told how Heracles, chasing a magical deer, ran past the boundary of the north wind, and there, struck by trees he had never seen, wanted to carry them back to Greece. By that legend, this is where the sacred olive of Olympia came from, the tree whose branches crowned Olympic victors. This is not geography yet. This is an image. Hyperborea is tied closely to Apollo. In one myth, he went there after killing the dragon Python near Delphi to cleanse himself of spilled blood. Only the greatest heroes reached it, Perseus and Heracles among them. An ordinary person did not know the road. That is why this land surfaces in Greek myth whenever something divine has to appear or vanish. And after the poets, Hyperborea is taken up by those we would call historians. Herodotus, the father of history, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, set down what he had heard of a northern people. He is pointedly careful. He repeats what others said and doubts it himself. He calls his source unreliable too, the poet Aristeas, who supposedly traveled north in a strange, almost trance-like state. But one detail he reports with confidence. On Delos, at the sanctuary of Apollo, people believed that 2 Hyperborean maidens, Hyperoke and Laodice, once came from the far north with sacred offerings wrapped in wheat straw. They died on Delos, and local girls laid locks of hair on their graves. After that, no envoys were sent. The gifts passed from hand to hand, people to people, border to border, until they crossed half the world and reached Delos. And Delos was no accident. In myth, it is the birthplace of Apollo. So the link between his island and the far north, where he was honored above all, seemed entirely natural. For the Greeks, this was not merely a story. It was a living custom attached to a specific temple. Centuries later, under the Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder describes the Hyperboreans, author of the vast natural history. He places them beyond the Riphean Mountains, past a snow-bound country where snow falls like feathers and darkness never lifts. And beyond those mountains, he adds, if this can be believed, lies the happy land. There the Hyperboreans reach great old age and know neither quarrels nor disease. The sun rises once a year and sets once. Half the year is day, half is night. They die only once they have had their fill of life. Then they hold a final feast and give themselves to the sea from a cliff. For them, this is the happiest death. The fullest description came from Diodorus Siculus. He speaks of a great island in the north, beyond the lands of the Celts, no smaller than Sicily. Fertile, with a mild climate that yields 2 harvests a year. There, he says, Leto was born, the mother of Apollo, which is why the Hyperboreans honor Apollo above every god and consider themselves his priests. A magnificent temple of Apollo stands on the island, circular in shape, and its people play the kithara without pause and sing his praises. They are ruled by descendants of Boreas himself, called the Boreads, and power passed only within that family. How were the Hyperboreans imagined? As a devout and just people, living without violence or hard labor. Some authors made them giants, others simply people of extraordinary long life. It was said they lived almost 1,000 years. They needed no laws, judges, or warriors because there were no crimes, quarrels, or enemies. They spent their days in music, singing, and celebration, closer to the gods than any mortals. In the poetic descriptions, it is a country of amber poplars and white swans on still water, with forests called the Garden of Apollo. Amber, too, was tied to the north. In myth, it was wept by the poplars into which the sisters of Phaethon were transformed as they mourned their brother. And here, a clue hides. Amber really did reach Greece from the far north, from the shores of a cold sea. So the north was not purely invention. Something from up there did reach them. And one more detail, the strangest. Once every 19 years, Diodorus says, Apollo visits the island in person. 19 is not a random number. It is exactly the period after which the solar and lunar calendars realign. The Greeks called it the Great Year. This cycle is a real astronomical phenomenon, and it later became the basis of calendars reconciling moon and sun. Which means the northern land in their imagination lived by a cosmic rhythm, by the movement of the heavens. Particular people were connected with Hyperborea too. The best known is Abaris, a priest of Apollo who, the Greeks said, traveled the world carrying the golden arrow of the god and taking no food. He came to the Greeks themselves, foretelling the future and turning away plagues. Later legends made him a miracle-working sage and even linked him with Pythagoras. So a Hyperborean priest became a carrier of secret, half-forgotten wisdom. Apollonius of Rhodes mentions the Hyperboreans as well, author of the poem about the Argonauts. He gives one short, telling image. Apollo, on his way to the countless people of the Hyperboreans, golden curls falling over his shoulders, the god moving north towards his own. And here is what deserves attention. That same list, no sickness, no old age, no war, repeats almost word for word across authors separated by centuries. Different locations, different details, but the core does not change. Because for the Greeks, Hyperborea was not a point on a map. Every writer puts it somewhere else. Beyond Scythia, near Britain, or in a distance nobody can reach. They did not know where it was. Opinion was already divided in antiquity. Some geographers waved it away as a fable. Others stubbornly looked for a place to put it. A few, Herodotus and Pliny among them, doubted it existed at all. Herodotus mocked the idea. If Hyperboreans live beyond the north wind, why not Hypernotians as well, a people beyond the south wind? And the Greeks knew exactly what the absence of all that was worth. Their world was one of endless wars between cities, of plagues, of short lives. Hyperborea knew no sickness, no old age, no war. Only light, music, and closeness to a god. Hyperborea was a mirror. In it, the Greeks painted less a distant country than their own dream of a perfect world. The story could stop right there. A beautiful Greek utopia, nothing more. But the strangest part begins when it turns out that similar stories were told by more than the Greeks. If only the Greeks had told of a happy northern land, the story would be simple. One culture, one attractive invention. But step away from Greece, and it turns out that similar traditions lived among quite different peoples who had almost no contact with the Greeks at all. Before going further, let us settle one thing. We are not going to prove that a lost civilization stood in the north. We are only looking closely at a strange fact. The image of a distant northern country, bright, ancient, lost, returns far too often to be waved away. Let us begin with something entirely real. Around 325 before the Common Era, the Greek navigator Pytheas of Massalia, present-day Marseille, sailed north. He passed Britain, and after 6 days reached a land he called Thule. There, he wrote, the summer sun barely sets. Night lasts 2 or 3 hours. And a day further on begins a frozen sea, neither water nor land nor air, which cannot be crossed by ship or on foot. The local people even showed him the place where the sun lies down to sleep. Where Thule was is still disputed. Some name Iceland, others the coast of Norway or the Shetlands. This was the first description in history of the polar day and of Arctic ice. Pytheas measured the height of the sun with a rod to determine latitude. He was no fantasist, but a scientist of his time. Yet his work on the ocean has not survived. We know it only through later authors, most of them mocking. The geographer Strabo simply called him a liar. Modern historians largely defend him. He described too precisely what a Greek from the Mediterranean could not have invented. He even noted that the people of Tula live by farming, make a drink from honey and grain, and thresh under cover rather than in the open because of constant rain. The name outlived every doubt. Ultima Thule, the furthest Tula, became a byword for the outermost limit of the earth. The phrase took on its own life. Virgil used it for the most distant, unconquered corner of the world. A real voyage turned almost at once into legend. Even when the North was genuinely seen, it refused to be geography. Now move far east to India. Indian and later Buddhist cosmology has the sacred mountain Meru or Sumeru. It is the axis of the world, an enormous mountain at its center with the gods living on its summit. Directly above it, the pole star stands motionless, called Dhruva, the immovable. Sun and moon revolve around the mountain, and its shadow falling across the earth brings night. Sacred rivers flow from its foot in 4 directions, and 4 great lands lie around it. The northern one, Uttarakuru, was described as a land of bliss, where people live long and free of care. That is nearly the Greek description. A far north, beyond mountains, unfailing health, the favor of the gods. 2 cultures at opposite ends of a continent, painting one paradise. Meru was held so sacred that temples were raised in its image across Asia, from Borobudur to Angkor Wat. Models in stone of the center of the world, where gods, sages, and heavenly maidens live among gardens. Look closer at that image. A mountain in the far north, a star frozen above it, the whole sky turning slowly around. That is a fairly precise description of the night sky seen from near the pole, where the pole star stands almost at the zenith, and the constellations circle all night without setting. How that image entered ancient Indian texts has no single answer. Similar motifs appear among the ancient Iranians. Their sacred book, the Avesta, mentions the ancestral homeland of the Aryans, Aryanem Vayeja. It was once a flourishing country, until a savage winter fell on it. 10 months of cold and only 2 of warmth. The same book describes a shelter built on the orders of the gods by the righteous king Yima to preserve the best of the living from destroying frost. Inside it, we are told, the sun, moon, and stars rose only once a year. A single day there lasted a whole year. The shelter is strikingly like an ark. The king gathered the seed of the finest plants and animals so life could survive a deadly winter. Yima later became Jamshid, king of a legendary golden age when neither death nor old age was known. The same elements again: a distant northern land, a flourishing paradise, a sudden catastrophe of cold, a hint of polar light. The Scandinavians had their own land of the gods. Asgard, home of the Aesir, joined to the human world by the rainbow bridge Bifrost. Above it rises the world tree Yggdrasil, holding 9 worlds with springs of wisdom and fate at its roots. Asgard is a heavenly realm rather than a point on a map, but the same thought shows through. Somewhere there is another, higher world, the home of the gods, beyond ordinary reach. Interestingly, the Icelander Snorri Sturluson tried to bring these myths back to Earth, claiming the Aesir were ancient migrants who came from the east. Even in the Middle Ages, people looked for a real migration behind the myth. Scandinavian tradition also kept a memory of a first happy age when the gods were young and untroubled and played on green meadows with golden figures until that time ended. And they knew the Fimble winter, a great winter 3 years long with no summer, coming before the end of the world. So we have a series of cultures, Greeks, Indians, Iranians, Scandinavians, separated by thousands of kilometers, by languages, by centuries, and the same set of images in their traditions. The North, a lost paradise, the home of the gods, and light behaving unlike light anywhere familiar. How is this explained? There are two answers, and it matters enormously not to confuse them. The first is calm and well supported. Most of these peoples belong to one great language family, the Indo-European. Thousands of years ago, they had a common ancestor. One people, one language, shared gods. Linguists have even reconstructed the names of those deities. The god of the shining sky, later Zeus to the Greeks, Jupiter to the Romans, Dyaus to the Indians, is one inherited word. The myth of a hero striking down a giant serpent repeats the same way. Indra kills the serpent Vritra. A Persian hero overcomes a three-headed dragon. Thor fights the world serpent. Scholars saw in them the echo of one very old story, told before these people separated. Divine twin brothers repeat too, the Ashvins and the Dioscuri. And these tribes scattered widely. On tamed horses and wheeled wagons, they carried their language and their traditions from India to the Atlantic, and fragments of shared myth went with them. So the coincidences are not a wonder, but a pattern. Besides, the dream of a lost golden age is among the most universal human ideas, found where no shared roots exist. The Greeks themselves had a second paradise, the Isles of the Blessed at the edge of the world, where heroes lived without sorrow. Even one culture could hold several lands of happiness. The second answer is far bolder. What if these traditions preserved the memory of a real northern homeland? That is what the Indian scholar and politician Bal Gangadhar Tilak argued in 1903 in The Arctic Home in the Vedas. He gathered from the Vedas and the Avesta the references to long nights, to a year lasting a single day, to a winter that destroyed a flourishing land, and concluded that the Aryans once lived near the North Pole and moved south when glacial cold came. Tilak was not the first. The American William Warren had put a similar idea in a book with the telling title, Paradise Found. And here, complete honesty is required. Tilak's theory was never accepted. Today, it is considered mistaken. It rests on outdated ideas about climate and continents, and researchers place the Indo-European homeland not in the Arctic, but in the steppes north of the Black Sea and the Caspian. The idea was later picked up by occultists and ideologues who turned the Aryan North into a dangerous myth, and we will return to that dark page. The Arctic theory now lives in popular books rather than lecture halls. Hold on to the main point. This is not proven history, but an eloquent guess kept alive by its own attractive logic. So, what actually stands behind all these traditions? Most probably not one lost country, but the shared past of related peoples, plus the permanent human longing for a lost paradise. That explains most of the coincidences. And still, the sense of a riddle does not go away, because certain details, a motionless star above a mountain, a year the length of a day, a sudden winter destroying a whole country, fit the polar picture with suspicious precision. And the strangest thing is not in the texts at all. Because if the traditions can be explained by shared roots, something else is harder to explain. That the same distant northern land began appearing where it had no business being, on maps. Let us return to the map this story began with. 1595, the Arctic map of Gerardus Mercator. At the very center, exactly on the pole, rises an enormous black rock. Around it turns a powerful whirlpool, into which the waters of every ocean pour and vanish, as if sucked into the depths of the earth. And around the pole lies a landmass, divided by 4 broad straits into 4 islands. On one of them, the cartographer even labeled the inhabitants, people of very small stature. Stop on that image. This is not a rough sketch of unknown territory. It is a detailed, thought-out geography of a place no European of the 16th century had seen. No ship had reached the pole, and still Mercator draws it as though a thorough description lay in front of him. This was no stray sheet. It grew out of his great world map of 1569, the one that gave the world his projection. The difficulty is that near the poles, that projection stretches land badly out of shape, and the pole itself cannot be shown at all. So for the Arctic, he made a separate circular map and filled the emptiness at its center with what he found in old books. And because he was the most respected cartographer of his age, others immediately reprinted that polar landmass as reliable. So where did the image come from? That question was asked by a contemporary, the English scholar John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth and one of the most learned men of his time. In 1577, he wrote asking Mercator to name his sources. And Mercator answered. The letter survives, and in it, he describes the polar whirlpool almost technically. The water circles the black rock and goes down into the earth as through a funnel. In it, Mercator admits he did not invent the polar land. He relied on an older book, Inventio Fortunata, roughly the fortunate discovery. Its author, by tradition, was an English Franciscan friar who, in the 14th century, 200 years before Mercator, reached the far north and supposedly measured it with an astrolabe. The book is long gone. Mercator knew it only through another traveler, Jacobus Neuen, whose work is also lost. So we have an image handed down through a chain of vanished texts across 2 centuries, a copy of a copy of a copy. And Dee was not asking out of curiosity. He was arguing for England's claim to the northern lands and wanted ancient evidence that there was anything up there to discover. It is worth understanding why the pole interested Europe so much. The seafaring powers were hunting for a short northern route to the riches of Asia, past America or past Siberia. Every scrap of knowledge about Arctic waters was worth its weight in gold. And when navigators like Martin Frobisher and John Davis returned with accounts of furious currents carrying enormous mountains of ice, it seemed like confirmation. Somewhere out there, a whirlpool really was swallowing the ocean. Real observation was laid over an old legend and only strengthened it. And here, the temptation begins. Could a medieval friar really have seen the pole? Could knowledge of an Arctic landmass have survived from some older time? Before drawing that conclusion, it is worth understanding how old maps worked. They worked nothing like modern ones. A cartographer of the 16th century did not fly over the land and mostly did not see what he drew. He collected other people's maps, sailors' accounts, ancient books, the theories of scholars. And where there was no data, he filled the emptiness with inherited images and logical guesswork. The Black Rock is the best example. It is not an observation, but a theory. In those days, people puzzled over why the magnetic needle points north, and decided that at the pole there had to be an enormous magnetic mountain pulling iron. The rock on Mercator's map is not the memory of a mountain. It is an attempt to explain the compass. And the image was not new. A magnetic island in the north was drawn before him by the Swede Olaus Magnus as early as 1539. His great sea chart was crowded with marvels, with sea monsters swallowing ships. Unknown space was filled not with emptiness, but with invention. Es sensue. All it took was for someone authoritative to draw a land that did not exist, and others copied it for decades. The island of Friesland sat proudly near Iceland and never existed. In the Atlantic, High Brazil was drawn just as stubbornly, appearing on charts for more than 300 years. The finest cartographers of Europe copied them, because that was what stood on the respectable maps before them. And when real discoveries contradicted the old map, people tried to reconcile them with the old invention. A few years after Mercator, his successor, Jodocus Hondius, reissued the same Arctic map, adding the genuine lands of Spitsbergen and Novaya Zemlya without removing the invented islands. The result was a map where two impossible realities sit side by side. Which brings us to the main point. Drawing lands nobody had seen was not a curiosity. It was ordinary practice. The best proof is an entire imaginary part of the world. For more than 2,000 years, from Aristotle and Ptolemy, Europeans believed an enormous continent had to lie in the south. There was no evidence. There was only logic. If there is so much land in the north, the south must hold something equivalent, or the world would tip over. Aristotle reasoned exactly so. The sphere of the earth had to be symmetrical. Ptolemy went further and joined southern Africa to Asia, closing the Indian Ocean with land on every side. The invented continent was called Terra Australis, the southern land. Cartographers drew it for centuries. Oholz Finet in 1531, Mercator himself, Ortelius, a land no European foot had touched. Now the interesting part. When ships finally moved south, that continent began to melt away. Where it was expected, ocean turned up. When Magellan rounded South America in 1520, the land left of his strait was taken for part of the great continent. But the further navigators sailed, the less remained. In the 18th century, James Cook went round the southern waters and found no warm continent, only ice and empty ocean. It shrank and receded until a century later, land really was found in the far south. Antarctica was sighted only around 1820, and so an ancient guess appeared to come true. The name did not disappear either. Australia was later named in honor of the Southern Land. On exactly this ground grew the maps that most frighten historians. It is a genre of puzzle in itself. From time to time, an old chart surfaces that supposedly shows what its makers could not have known, and a theory about a forgotten advanced civilization is born at once. The most famous is the map of the Turkish admiral Piri Reis, drawn in 1513 on gazelle hide. Only a fragment survives, roughly a third of the original. Piri Reis wrote that he compiled it from around 24 older charts, one of them belonging to Columbus. It shows the Atlantic coasts of Europe, Africa, and South America with remarkable accuracy. And at the bottom is a mysterious strip of land. In 1965, the American professor Charles Hapgood claimed in Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings that this was the coast of Antarctica, and without ice. Since Antarctica has been covered for thousands of years, someone must have drawn it in time out of mind, an unknown and extraordinarily advanced civilization. Some went further and invoked extraterrestrial technology and aerial photography. The same idea was attached to the map of Oholz Finet. It sounds astonishing, but closer study changed the picture. Researchers, Gregory McIntosh among them, showed that this Antarctica is in fact the coast of South America, bent sideways to fit the sheet. Between it and the mainland there is no strait, though one should be there. The outlines match only if you want very much to see a match. Hapgood also claimed the map used the Mercator projection, impossible for 1513, and that was not confirmed either. The resemblance was accidental. And his theory of a sudden shift of the Earth's crust was rejected by science. So the riddle of Piri Reis has a calmer explanation. An accurate map of known coasts, plus a southern land, drawn in exactly as the period demanded. Not the memory of a lost world, but real knowledge mixed with an old theory. So how did cartographers draw what they had not seen? Mostly the same way. They inherited old sources, built out the emptiness with theory, and copied from one another. Both ends of the earth, the southern continent and the northern landmass, they invented before they ever saw them. Now and then a guess fell close to something real, and the map looked prophetic. Mercator's Arctic continent is the same, a ghost grown from a lost medieval book, not a memory of Hyperborea. That is the solution to most impossible maps. Not secret knowledge, but the old habit of finishing the world with a story where the facts run out. And yet one detail is hard to wave away. Why the North? Why is the persistent image not a patch of land, but an ordered country, with a mountain at the center, 4 straits, 4 islands? Why did imagination assemble the same structure again and again? Part of that can be explained. The 4 straits and 4 lands came from old sources, from that same lost book. And the division of the world into 4 quarters, with an axis mountain in the middle, is an ancient cosmological image. We saw it among the Indians, with Meru and its 4 lands. So even the structure of the Arctic continent is an inherited template, not independent evidence. And still, that does not close the question. Why the North drew imagination so stubbornly remains open. It is one of those questions history leaves without comment. Sometimes, old maps really do look as though people from another world drew them. But the maps were only the beginning. Because some would not settle for lines on parchment, they went north, to look for a land that supposedly does not exist. Until now, Hyperborea lived on the pages of books and in the corner of old maps. But at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, something new happened. The legend stepped off the paper. People began assembling expeditions, funding searches, and founding secret societies to find the northern homeland for real. And this is where the history of Hyperborea turns genuinely dark. At first, the idea still looked respectable. Even serious authors, Warren's Paradise Found among them, suggested that the cradle of humanity had once been at the pole. That appearance of solidity opened the door to those who used science only as cover. It began with occultists. In 1888, Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, published The Secret Doctrine. In it, she portrayed human history as a succession of root races and called one of them Hyperborean, the ancient inhabitants of a northern continent. Theosophy was fashionable among the European intelligentsia, so the idea spread widely. In the same period, Ignatius Donnelly's book on Atlantis was gaining weight, and Atlantis too was proclaimed the cradle of civilization. Gradually, these images merged. Atlantis, Thule, Hyperborea, all blurred into one vague dream of a lost homeland. The strength of theosophy was dressing an old myth in scientific-looking clothes, presenting it not as a tale, but as a lawful stage of human evolution. That gave it a deceptive persuasiveness. So an ancient Greek image of a blessed land became something else entirely. Hyperborea was no longer a dream of a happy country. It was presented as the lost homeland of a special, higher race. This was a fatal turn. In Austria and Germany, the idea was taken up by the Ariosophists, occultists such as Guido von List and Lanz von Liebenfels, who combined theosophical fantasy with Germanic racism. And the relay was then picked up by a Germany crushed by defeat in the First World War. In 1918, the Thule Society appeared in Munich, named after that same mythical northern land. It was founded by the occultist Rudolf von Sebottendorf as cover for an older secret order. Formerly a circle for the study of Germanic antiquity, in reality a nationalist, anti-Semitic organization preaching Aryan superiority and tracing the Germans to a lost northern civilization. Its emblem was a dagger with a swastika. Members met in a luxurious Munich hotel, published their own newspaper, and even planned an attack on the far-left premier of Bavaria. The society had grown out of an older anti-Semitic order, the Germanenorden, and numbered a few hundred in Munich and around 1,500 across Bavaria. A narrow circle rather than a mass movement, but it stood at the center of the bloody politics of the post-war years. When a communist Bavarian Soviet Republic held Munich for a few weeks in 1919, several members were taken hostage and shot, and that enraged and consolidated the local right. Among those connected to the society were figures who became prominent Nazis. Dietrich Eckart, who taught Hitler to speak to a crowd and to whom Hitler dedicated Mein Kampf. Rudolf Hess. Alfred Rosenberg. The society's newspaper became the chief mouthpiece of the Nazi Party, and the society helped bring into being the force from which the National Socialist Party arose. And now, an extremely important caution. A whole mythology later grew around the Thule Society, claiming Nazism was secretly directed by a lodge of sorcerers, and that Hitler was an initiated occultist seeking the magical power of Hyperborea. This is not true. Hitler was not a member, and most likely never met Sebottendorf. The real danger was not magic. It was that an old tale about a northern homeland had been turned into a racial myth, and that myth helped justify one of the most terrible catastrophes in history. Later, under the Nazi regime, a whole state institution appeared, the Ahnenerbe, ancestral heritage, created within the SS. Its task was to give the Aryan myth a scientific appearance, and it sent expeditions across the world, as far as Tibet, looking for traces of an ancient higher race. There was even a fashion for the world ice theory, explaining the history of the planet through cosmic catastrophes. These searches found no lost continent. What they found was a pseudo-scientific justification for crimes. But Hyperborea was not sought only in the West, and here lies a bitter irony. While Germany forged a weapon of racial hatred from the myth of a northern homeland, at the other end of Europe, the same legend was taken up by a country that proclaimed itself the opposite of all mysticism, Soviet Russia, and the central figure was Alexander Barchenko. Barchenko was a man of strange fortunes, a physician by training, a science fiction writer, an occultist, and an investigator of what he called mysterious phenomena of the psyche. He believed a highly developed ancient civilization had once existed in the north, and that echoes of its knowledge survived among northern peoples. In 1922, he set out to find it, on the Kola Peninsula, in the remote tundra around Sadozero, a lake sacred to the Sami. Officially, the expedition was to study a strange phenomenon, a form of mass compulsion occurring among local inhabitants. This condition, a kind of polar hysteria in which a person suddenly repeats other people's movements and words without meaning to, had interested scholars for a long time. Barchenko saw in it the trace of an ancient knowledge. He believed in a single lost science of antiquity and looked for its echoes among the Sami and in Tibetan legends of Shambhala. The expedition was searching for more than an explanation of an illness. And, by his own account, he found it. Remains of ancient structures, stone blocks of regular shape, something resembling a pyramid, an enormous figure on a sheer cliff. He announced he had discovered traces of Hyperborea. The Sami told of underground passages and of someone living beneath the mountains, which only fired him further. The next year, another expedition followed his tracks, and Barchenko founded a secret society of like-minded people and went on persuading even senior officials. Almost nobody believed him. Among those who rejected his conclusions was the academician Alexander Fersman, a real scientist who knew the geology of that region better than anyone. But the strangest thing in his story is not Sedozero. It is the company he kept. Barchenko worked for the Soviet secret police. His patron was Gleb Boki, head of the secret cipher department, one of the most influential and most feared men in the security organs. In closed laboratories, Barchenko studied telepathy and the transmission of thought at a distance, in a neuroenergetic laboratory of which almost no documents remain. Occultism, espionage, and science were tangled into one knot. And he was not alone. The young Soviet state, for all its demonstrative materialism, took a serious interest in lost sciences, in telepathy, hypnosis, and ancient secret knowledge it dreamed of turning into a weapon. In those same years, the artist Nicholas Roerich set out for Central Asia in search of Shambhala, not without the attention of the security services either. Hyperborea in the north and Shambhala in the east were two halves of one dream, a dream of a forgotten source of power. It ended terribly. In 1937, Barchenko was arrested, and in the spring of 1938, he was executed, accused of creating a Masonic counter-revolutionary organization and of espionage. Boki was executed soon after. The Great Terror swallowed almost their entire circle, and the Soviet experiments with secret sciences were shut down and classified for decades. Barchenko's records were destroyed or hidden in closed archives, and the expedition materials disappeared with him. All that remained were rumors of a pyramid on the shore of a northern lake. More than half a century passed. In the late 1990s, searchers returned to Sedozero. The subject, almost forgotten in Soviet times, came alive again as a fashionable riddle for a wide public. The philosopher Valery Demin organized new expeditions in Barchenko's footsteps and again announced discoveries. Steps cut into rock, remains of walls, that same pyramid. Demin popularized the phrase Russian Hyperborea, and Sedozero turned into something close to a place of pilgrimage. But when geologists looked closely, the wonder dissolved. The giant figure on the cliff, which the Sami had long called Kuiva and considered the shadow of a defeated giant, turned out to be a natural stain, a dark streak of rock, moisture, and lichen. The pyramids and steps were ordinary results of glacial action and weathering. Nature in the north really does produce forms easy to mistake for the work of hands, and the human eye hunts for the familiar in chaotic outlines, for faces, stairways, walls. Where an inspired searcher saw the ruins of Hyperborea, a geologist saw a rock. And still, look at what went on across that century. Hyperborea was sought by occultists and ideologues, by security services and solitary enthusiasts. Societies were founded for it, expeditions fitted out, people put to death. The fates of entirely real human beings passed through a single legend. From nearly every search, only fragments remain: classified files, burned diaries, careful rumors, as if the subject itself attracted secrecy. And everyone came back with the same thing, with belief, but without proof. And here is what is most troubling. These people were no longer looking for confirmation in archives or ancient texts. They traveled north because they believed something more had been left there, In the land and the stone itself. Traces. Because stone, unlike a manuscript, cannot be burned or locked in a safe. If there really is something in the north, it is still there, under the open sky. And it is these traces we will look at now. Texts can be rewritten, maps drawn over, archives burned. Stone keeps silent more honestly. And stone is the main witness here, because the north is scattered with traces. Traces we cannot read. Consider what this land is. Tundra to the horizon, bare granite, a wind that has not dropped in thousands of years. In places, there is a silence that does not exist in cities. And in that silence are things that have given no peace for 100 years. Begin with the simplest of them, and the strangest. All across the north, from Scandinavia to the Kola Peninsula, stand enormous boulders, each the size of a car, some the size of a house. And they do not lie on the ground. They stand on several small stones, as if someone lifted a block of many tons and set it down on little legs. The local peoples called them seeds, sacred stones, the dwelling of spirits. Offerings were brought to them, fish heads, reindeer antlers. People feared to touch them. Moving a seed, it was said, brought disaster on your whole family line. Some weighed dozens of tons, no wheel, no machine, only people of the Stone Age. And still the block stands on 3 pebbles, like a cup on a saucer. And that is not even the strangest part. Many seeds stand on summits. Someone lifted these blocks onto bare, wind-swept rock and set them where almost nobody would see. Why? In places, such stones number in the hundreds, a whole mountain strewn with them. And over all of it, one question. Who raised them up there? And what for? The question is honestly open. Some were probably left by the glacier. Retreating, it dropped boulders anywhere, and a few could have settled on smaller stones by themselves. But others look too deliberate, too well made to be a whim of the ice. You stand before one and cannot shake the thought that it was placed here, deliberately, for a purpose nobody is left to explain. But the Sades are only the beginning. Come down to the cold sea at the edge of the north. On deserted islands, laid straight on the ground, are spirals of stone. Labyrinths, circles within circles, passages winding to the center that lead nowhere. Walk into one, and the path takes you in a circle, inward, outward, inward again. And there is one way out, the way you came. Local people called them Babylons. There are dozens. On one tiny island, 14. Similar spirals turn up across all the northern seas, as if different people on different shores agreed on one sign. Some are thousands of years old, laid in the Stone Age, on empty shores, far from any dwelling. Beside them are hundreds of stone mounds, in some, human bones. The dead did not lie inside the labyrinths. They lay next to them. And here is the central question. What for? Nobody knows. That is not exaggeration for effect. Archaeologists have no answer. There are plenty of guesses. Fish traps, perhaps. Perhaps a boundary between the living and the dead. Perhaps a trap for the soul, so it tangles in the spiral and never finds its way back. Not one version is proven, not one. And the longer you look, the stronger the sense that this is a message, left by someone, meant for someone. Only the recipient stopped being us long ago. Consider what that means. People thousands of years ago dragged stones onto a bare shore, laid these circles one after another. There was meaning in it. important enough to spare no strength. And then they left, and took the meaning with them. We stand among their spirals and cannot read them. And that is not all the North left. On the coastal cliffs of the same region, someone cut whole canvases into the rock. Boats, reindeer, hunters on skis, whales. Strange figures like people, but not quite. Thousands of images, made when there was neither writing nor cities here. In low sun, they come alive. Shadows settle into the carved lines, and a whole life appears. A chase, a hunt, a boat of rowers traveling across the millennia. There is not one of them here, nor 100. Whole galleries in stone, stretching along the water for generations. Among them, a giant figure they came to call the demon. Centuries later, monks cut a cross straight over it, to subdue what they no longer understood. Someone wanted this to remain, wanted to say something to us across the abyss of time. And we stand and understand not a word. Beyond this lies territory where one steps carefully, because in those same places, enthusiasts find more. Stone slabs, too, even. Steps that lead into a slope and break off. Walls that look like ruins. And what people call the northern pyramids. Mountains of stone stacked into a regular shape. And giant figures, as though carved into the cliffs. Dark silhouettes as tall as a building, looking over the water. Some are certain these are the remains of that ancient civilization of Hyperborea. It sounds thrilling. And here comes the most important moment of this film. Because when geologists finally climb to these ruins, the wonder almost always melts. The pyramids turn out to be ordinary cliffs. The steps are cracks that ice and water cut into stone across millennia. The giant figure on the crag is a play of dark rock, moisture, and lichen. And the unnaturally even slabs come from something simple. Frost splits hard rock along straight lines, as with a chisel. Stranger still, where ground freezes and thaws for centuries, stones arrange themselves into circles, rings, and even bands. It is called patterned ground. It looks like the work of hands. It is the cold, sorting stones by itself. The North is a master of such illusions. Nature raises forms that take the breath away. What looks like temple steps was often shaped by ice. And yet, someone really did set up the sides. Someone really did lay the labyrinths. Someone really did cover the cliffs with images. And why, we really do not know. Here we must be honest. This is not evidence of Hyperborea. These are traces of real people. They lived here thousands of years ago. They had their faith, their order, their reasons. Hunters and fishermen, without metal, without writing. People who survived where survival is barely possible and still found strength for the sacred. Their reasons disappeared with them. And worse, even those who still live here mostly no longer know the answer. The memory of what these stones meant faded even among the descendants of those who set them. The signs remained. The voice that explained them fell silent. And perhaps that is the whole truth about the North. Not a lost super-civilization with pyramids under the ice. Something quieter and more unsettling. People so far back that only signs are left of them, and the key to those signs is erased. Not an empire, not a miracle, a depth of time we cannot look into. And perhaps that is why we want so badly to see Hyperborea in these stones, because a great lost civilization is a pleasanter story than the cold truth, than people who once lived here whom we will never know. Emptiness is easier to fill with a wonder than to accept. And that is almost always enough to explain everything. Almost. Because one objection is hard to wave away. Think where we have been standing, in the cold, merciless north, where darkness covers the land half the year and the ground freezes hundreds of meters down. And this frozen ground preserves the past better than any museum. Whole mammoths are still found in it, with their skin, with the last grass in their teeth. Thousands of years, and it looks like yesterday. The North does not erase the past, it freezes it. And quite recently, by the measure of the Earth, all this lay under kilometers of ice. The great ice retreated only around 12,000 years ago. And as it melted, countless tons of water poured into the seas. The ocean rose by dozens of meters and swallowed whole plains where people had lived and hunted. Those lands are still there, on the floor of cold seas. Lost countries underwater are not invention. They are documented fact. And the moment the ice went, people came onto the freed land. Why so quickly? What drew them to the edge of a frozen world? And why hold to it so stubbornly that they left sacred stones on summits? What if it was once different here? What if this land was not always a kingdom of ice? Because if life really did move here, warm and large, another question arises, the hardest of all. Where did it go? What could happen to a whole region and wipe a world off it? What can wipe a whole world off the face of the earth? Not a city, not a people. A world, all at once. The question sounds like the opening of science fiction, but the answer is simple and frightening. It has already happened. Once. For real. Go back 20,000 years. The North then was another planet. Ice lay over the whole upper half of the world, not snow. Ice. A wall of it, kilometers high. It covered the ground where cities, forests, and rivers now stand. Where we live, there was nothing. A white, silent desert past the horizon. The ice crept from the mountains of Scandinavia, covered the future Britain, pressed on the heart of the continent. Whole future countries lay buried under it. And in that world of ice, life was everywhere. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, herds nobody will ever see again. Some of these giants are still found in the permafrost, whole, as if they had just fallen asleep. The last witnesses of a world that did not survive in 2 hours. And among them, people. Few, hardened, who had learned to live at the edge of the possible. That was the world, cold, harsh, and alive. And then it ended. Not in a day, but by the measure of the Earth, almost instantly. Around 12,000 years ago, the planet began to warm. The ice moved. And here, the most dramatic part begins. Because the ice did not melt quietly. At one point, the land dropped back into cold for a whole millennium. So suddenly, it was as if the warmth had been switched off. Then the frost let go again. Consider what that meant. Warmth was returning. Life was lifting its head. And winter fell back over everything, as though the world had changed its mind about living. For those who saw it, this could have been the end. The world was thrown from heat into ice and back. And then came the water. Meltwater gathered into enormous lakes, sealed in by ice. And when a dam of ice failed, floods came on a scale hard to hold in the mind. Not rain, not a river breaking its banks. Walls of water the height of mountains, shearing off landscapes in days, gouging canyons, carrying boulders the size of houses. What took millennia to build, water washed away in a week. The earth still carries the scars. And the seas were rising. Slowly, year by year, Century by century, the ocean swelled with meltwater and advanced on the land. It rose by dozens of meters and swallowed whole plains, coastlines, valleys where people had lived and hunted. Those lands did not disappear. They lie on the floor of cold seas. This happened in front of generations. A grandfather remembered a shore where his grandson saw only water. The sea took the world across a few lifetimes, slow enough to leave time for grief, relentless enough that there was nowhere to run. Under the water is a real lost world, not a legend, a fact. The masters of that world went with it. The great animals died out one after another. Whole cultures vanished, leaving almost nothing but a few stone tools. That is how an epic went out. And now stop on one thought. People saw all of this. Not from books, not from stories, with their own eyes. They watched the land of their grandfathers go under. They watched the sea take what had been home for thousands of years. And when they made their first stories, very nearly the first thing in them was water. Water that swallowed the world. And they told others. Almost every ancient people has that story. A great flood, water swallowing the world, a few survivors who begin again. Noah, the Babylonian hero who builds a ship. The Greek Deucalion, the Iranian king who hides life from destruction. In India, the sage Manu warned by a fish. Different languages, different gods, one memory. The memory of a time when the world went underwater. And here, an attentive viewer will ask, might the catastrophe have been sharper? There are bolder versions. Some say the poles once shifted instantly, that the crust slid, and in a day the north turned from warm country into ice. Others say a comet did it, that a blow from the sky ended the Ice Age and destroyed a forgotten civilization. It sounds cinematic. And that is their attraction. They turn a slow tragedy into one striking moment, a spectacle with an explosion. And that is why we should be careful. Because the magnetic poles really have swapped places, that much is true. But slowly, over millennia, not in a day. Science finds no sudden reversal. And the comet? It was put forward seriously, but most scientists, checking the evidence, rejected it. No crater, no convincing traces. So the spectacular explosion that killed paradise almost certainly never happened. And the most interesting part? It is not needed. Because the real catastrophe, slower but no less vast, did happen. The world of the Ice Age existed and vanished. The mammoths died. Lands went under. Rivers, coastlines, and the sky overhead changed. A whole world was erased without any comet, simply by the ending of the Great Cold. And people lived through it and remembered. Now, put it together. Somewhere in the north, there was once another world. That is true. It perished in water and ice. That is also true. And the memory of it passed from mouth to mouth for thousands of years until details wore away, dates were forgotten, outlines blurred. What remained was a feeling. That there was once a home, brighter, warmer, better, and that we lost it. Perhaps Hyperborea is not a place that disappeared. Perhaps it is the memory of loss itself, rewritten so it hurts less to carry. And if so, one last question remains, the most important of all. Why does humanity need so badly to believe the home was real? We have reached the most important question of this film. Not where Hyperborea was, but why we want so much for it to have been. Look at a strange fact. There is no evidence. The maps were fantasy. The expeditions came back with nothing. The stones say nothing. And the legend lives on, for thousands of years, with no intention of dying. Why? Perhaps because Hyperborea answers a need older than itself. Because the story of a lost paradise is told by everyone. The Greeks believed there was once a golden age. People lived like gods, without labor, war, or old age. The earth gave fruit by itself. They died as though falling asleep. And once gone, they remained kindly spirits, invisible guardians of the living. Then came other times, worse: silver, bronze, iron, down to ours, the hardest and cruelest. In India, the same: 4 ages descending from an age of truth to an age of darkness. And we, the sacred texts say, live in the last, the darkest. In the Bible, a garden humanity was driven from, the way back sealed forever by an angel with a flaming sword. Different religions, different continents, different millennia, one plot. Once it was better, we lost it. And we are not going back. Why is this story the same everywhere? Part of the answer we have discussed. Perhaps it is the distant echo of a real catastrophe, the memory of a world that did perish in ice and water. Living memory compresses time. What lasted thousands of years congeals into a moment. Real people become gods. A real country becomes paradise. A slow disaster becomes sudden punishment. History turns into myth simply because it is retold too long. And paradise always lies where memory cannot reach, a little earlier than the oldest recollection, far enough that nobody can say for certain it never was. But there is a deeper reason. We are simply built this way. Every generation feels things were once better. Ask any old person, and you will hear the grass was greener and people kinder. That feeling does not depend on the era. The Greeks had it. Medieval monks had it. We have it. And such a story does not merely comfort, it is needed. It gives meaning to the present. If we fell from a better world, our pain is not accident, but exile. And then a road back exists somewhere. The myth of a lost paradise makes suffering comprehensible. A lost paradise is not a point on a map. It is the shape human sorrow takes. There is a word for it: nostalgia. Today it means longing for the past. It was once considered an illness, a disease people believed could kill. The word was made from 2 Greek ones: homecoming and pain. The pain of return. Longing for a home you cannot reach. And perhaps Hyperborea is that home. Not a country. A sense that somewhere is a place where we would truly be well. A place we came out of and do not know the road back to. Almost every faith carries the same unease, that we are guests here, travelers, that the real home is elsewhere, and we are on the way to it. The human being may be the only creature that longs for a place it has never been. Recall how this began. The Greeks painted Hyperborea as a world without what they suffered from, without disease, without war, without death. Every age adds to its paradise whatever it lacks most. And here it is worth asking honestly, what is it that we lack? We live in a world that knows almost everything. We weighed the atom, measured the ocean floor, saw the far side of the moon. No blank spaces are left on the map. Every patch of ground is photographed from orbit. The world became known, explained, calculated. We traded gods for mechanisms, thunder for electricity, fate for statistics. A fair exchange. We got medicine, machines, light at night. But with mystery, the sense of wonder left the world too. And here is the strange part. Precisely when almost no mysteries were left, the longing for them flared up. The less there is that cannot be explained, the more we want to believe that somewhere, beyond the ice, under the water, deep in time, something great is still hidden, sacred, lost. Hyperborea returns not because new evidence appeared, but because we are lacking something again. Perhaps the sense that the world is bigger than what we know of it. Look around. There have never been so many books, films, and videos about lost civilizations, ancient secrets, forgotten worlds. And right now, you are watching one. That is not accident. It is a symptom of our time. But this longing has a dark side. That must be said honestly too. Because the same dream of a lost golden home once became a weapon. Someone promised people the home had been theirs, and theirs alone. Millions of lives were paid for that tale. Longing for paradise can console. It can also kill. Everything depends on whether we tell memory apart from desire. And yet, there is light in this longing too. Because grief for a paradise behind us is the same force that drives us to build a better world ahead. Anyone who longs for a golden age has not made peace with the present one. The dream of a lost home is a refusal to believe things will always be this way. And this is where we arrive. Hyperborea is not a lie, and not a discovery. It is a mirror. In it, every people and every age sees its own emptiness and gives it the name of a lost paradise. The Greeks saw the peace they did not have. The occultists saw the greatness they craved. And we, most likely, see the meaning we lack most. Hyperborea was never a place. It was always our reflection. And yet one thing remains. If it is only a myth, why has it outlived everything? Empires, religions, whole millennia. Why has the memory of a land that most probably never existed proved more durable than almost everything that did? Perhaps because myths do not preserve facts. They preserve something far more important. We have come a long way. Time to stop and look back. It began with the Greeks, with a land beyond the north wind, where neither old age nor war nor death was known. Then it turned out they were not the only ones who remembered such a country. The same far north surfaced in India, among the Persians, among the Scandinavians. One memory across half the world. Then came the maps. A continent that does not exist, drawn so confidently that someone might have had it in front of them. Then the people, those who were not satisfied with a legend and went to find it. Occultists, ideologues, security services. Some paid with their lives. Then the stones, sides on the summits, spirals on the shores, signs we no longer read. And then the ice, and a harsh truth. The North really was once another world, and that world really did perish. And the same images ran through all of it. The spiral, the mountain at the center of the world, land divided into four, and always the North. The same handful of signs, in texts, on maps, in stone. As though humanity, with many hands, keeps drawing one dream. And now we stand at the end of the road, with everything we gathered. And we must ask a simple question. So which part of this is true? Let us be honest to the end. We did not find Hyperborea as a country. Every specific trace followed far enough led to something ordinary. A map was a copy of an older map. A pyramid was a plain cliff. A polar paradise was a dream, not a place. By the strict accounting of evidence, Hyperborea did not exist. And that had to be said plainly. We did not come here to be comforted with a beautiful tale. We came for the truth, even colder. We could stop right there, if not for one objection. We cannot prove Hyperborea existed. But we equally cannot explain why the memory of it outlived everything. Think about that. Empires vanished. Languages died. Whole peoples were erased without a trace. And a story about a northern land that almost certainly never existed went on living, retold again and again for thousands of years, from Herodotus to this video. Something that never existed proved sturdier than almost everything that did. And here's the paradox. The more honestly we demolished the false answers, the clearer the real riddle showed. No longer the riddle of a pyramid or a map, the riddle of this stubborn, indestructible memory. How is that possible? Perhaps because myths preserve something other than what we assume. Not dates, not places, not facts. They preserve what mattered to a human being. Fear, loss, longing, hope. We do not remember the flood, but every people remembered the terror of it. We do not remember the whirl of the Ice Age, but we kept the longing for a warm home we lost. A myth is what a powerful feeling turns into after thousands of years. And in that sense, a myth remembers more than history. History remembers what happened. A myth remembers what we felt while it happened. And perhaps that is why one story converges among so many peoples. Not because they saw the same land, but because they lived through the same loss. What they shared was not a continent, it was a feeling. And here it is worth saying something that makes the skin prickle. The modern human being has lived on this earth around 300,000 years, and learned to write only 5,000 years ago. Which means almost the whole history of humanity, tens of thousands of years, is written nowhere. No chronicles, no names, no dates. Everything lived through, thought through, and mourned existed in one place, in living memory, in what was passed on. In myth. For tens of thousands of years, myth was the only way to carry something important forward. Not entertainment, not a bedtime story. The storehouse of memory for the whole human race. So perhaps the most troubling thought in this film is this. We have forgotten far more than we remember. And what we call legends may be the last surviving pages of that lost book. Because the ice really did erase a world. Real people really did watch their home go under. And almost all of it vanished, leaving a feeling that there was once a better, brighter country, and we lost it. So when we ask whether Hyperborea existed, perhaps the honest answer is this. Something existed. We simply cannot reach it anymore. And every civilization thought itself eternal. Egypt, Rome, all certain their world would last forever. Not one was right. And now the last thought, the hardest of all. If a whole world could disappear so completely that only stones and a vague dream were left, it can happen again, to any world, including ours. Someday, far from now, perhaps just as little will remain of everything we built. A few fragments, a few strange signs nobody will understand. Our cities under a layer of earth, our satellites silent dots that will fall out of the sky, our libraries dust. And someone, far in the future, will tell a legend about a lost golden age, about an astonishing civilization that knew almost everything. And that will be us. Perhaps that is why we will not let Hyperborea go. Because somewhere, deep down, we suspect that one day someone will just as unwillingly let go of us. And somewhere in the far north, the polar night is still going on. The wind carries snow over the ice, the same silence we began with. And in that silence lies a land that says nothing about all it has seen. Sometimes myths are not inventions of the past. They are memories humanity is afraid to lose.